Hello everyone, Word Thane here with 7 things that you might find useful to know about Old English. Whether you're just starting out, whether you're thinking about tackling the language, you might find these things useful to be aware of as you study this ancient and fascinating language. The first is spelling and pronunciation. Contrary to what you can often read, rather sensational things, we don't know what Old English sounded like. We actually have a very solid idea for points that I'll make in another video, how we know what Old English sounded like. Likewise, the spelling, which is often standardized in textbooks and in grammars so that you have a regular and consistent base to go on. It's standardized usually to the West Saxon dialect. Over 90% of what we have of Old English exists only in that dialect or mostly in that dialect. For the most part, the other dialects are quite fragmentary. So by default, what we have is Wessex dialect, and we'll be talking more about that in another video as well. Second thing to think about is grammar and grammatical terminology. Many people loathe this kind of thing, but if you think about grammar as a kind of shorthand, a kind of compact explanation, that can help. Most textbooks and grammars use the same terminology, so it pays to be minimally familiar with it. And one advantage of having a consistent terminology is that when you go from book to book, you don't have to learn a whole new set of terms that another author is using in place of established terms. So find a textbook that doesn't deluge you with grammar terms, and you'll probably learn a lot more. Third point is gender and agreement. Old English does have gender. If you've studied Spanish, you know that you need to learn el and la along with nouns, that adjectives and nouns need to echo or agree with each other. Same thing is true with Old English. Old English has 3 genders, masculine, feminine, and neuter. They are marked by similar things, articles, demonstratives. They're called a number of different things. Se is masculine, se is feminine, that is neuter. And if you learn these along with nouns, that will help a lot as you go down the road. Start thinking about them in terms of their gender. Fourth point to consider is case. We have remnants of case, mostly just in our pronouns. We have I, me, my, he, his, him, she, her, hers, and so on, we, us, our, and so on. But we don't have a whole lot anywhere else. Old English does the same thing, but it does it with all of its nouns. So that's simply an extra set of markers on the ends of words to learn. 4 cases, nominative or subject case, accusative or object case, direct object, genitive or possessive case, and the dative or indirect object case. You could also think of it as the prepositional case. So the cases simply mark common relationships among nouns. After a while, you begin to recognize the case markers. They do help immensely when you are learning Old English grammar. An example in modern English, I gave the king's gold to the thanes, and I'm going to be marking that sentence. You'll see it in the notes that I add here. Okay, moving on to the next point. There are 3 kinds of verbs in Old English. We have remnants of them as well in modern English, and that's an important point actually to consider. Everything that is in Old English has at least an echo or a ghost or some kind of descendant in modern English. Sometimes it's a thin trickle, but it's always there. So that's important to remember. So weak verbs, or what we call regular verbs in modern English, things like walk, walked, touch, touched, buy, bought, a little bit more irregular. There are similar ones like that in Old English. And then the vowel verbs. So if those are the consonant verbs that mark tense with a D or T sound at the end, then you are the strong verbs, or the vowel verbs, as I like to call them, that ring, rang, rung, sing, sang, sung, drink, drank, drunk, give, gave, write, wrote, written. Those are all the strong verbs, as they're called. That terminology is about 200 and some years old. It comes from Jakob Grimm, the German grammarian. He devised that simply that the nouns and the verbs also have the strength to show more information or are weak and rely on other information. And finally, the small but very common category of what we call the helping verbs or auxiliary verbs, which are often confusingly called the preterite present verbs, which simply means an old past tense became the present tense and then a new past tense was formed. So it's a complicated grammatical term for about exactly a dozen, not just about, but almost exactly a dozen verbs in Old English. For example, kunan, to know how to, maran, to be able to, the ancestors of can and may in modern English. All right, moving on to word formation. One of the great powers and marvels of Old English and the Germanic languages in general is their ability to compound and derive many new words. We still do this in modern English. We just don't think about it very much. We have forethought, outgo, income, byword. We're still doing it. Many of these are very old words, but we're still making new ones on the same model. So that function, that factor in modern English is still alive and well. The seventh and final thing to think about and to recall and to be cheered by is how many resources are now available. Every year it seems there are more. I've devoted one video to resources. I'm going to be devoting another to online and auditory resources. There are recordings, there are grammars, there are textbooks, there are classes, like I've mentioned, that I and a colleague also teach in Old English on Facebook, through Zoom, or sometimes through Google Meet. So again, I'm going to go through them again. Spelling and pronunciation, grammar and grammatical terminology, gender and agreement, case for adjectives, nouns, and pronouns, three main kinds of verbs, word formation, and finally resources. 7 things it's useful to consider, and the last one, the resources, outweighs all the challenges that all the others will provide you. And I'll be talking more about these things. If you have questions, please post them in the comments. Thank you. Wessex.